Saying I'm leaving the house or something.
I know, right? Did she text him?
No. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the October 29th, 2018 Board of Selectmen meeting here in Georgetown. I want to welcome everybody in the audience and everybody who is viewing at home. Before we get started, if we could all rise for our invocation and our Pledge of Allegiance, please.
Father God, creator of all, we come before you as your servants and the elected servants of the people. We stand before you and thank you for the many blessings you have bestowed upon us and our community. We ask for the safety of our first responders and for wisdom and discernment of all the boards and committees in town. As always, we thank you in the manner that we were taught to pray in. Amen.
Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, again, I want to thank everyone in the audience for attending tonight. Generally, we like to get to everything so we can clear the room so you guys don't have to fall asleep on us with other business. But we will start tonight with something that happened over the weekend here in Georgetown. I want to get to it because of the fact that I got several inquiries on it. There was a press release that was sent today by our PR firm. So I will read it verbatim so that everybody who's viewing at home and who hasn't seen it on social media, can learn a little bit about what happened. So on Saturday, October 27, 2018, the United States Postal Service contacted the Georgetown Police Department to advise that one of their postal carriers had picked up a suspicious package on Taylor Street in Georgetown. Georgetown Police Department units responded and secured the area where the package was located. The Massachusetts State Police Bomb Unit was notified, requesting their assistance, and responded to the scene. The Georgetown Fire Department was also dispatched to the scene, as well as the Georgetown Highway Department, to assist with securing the area. The FBI and United States Postal Inspection Service were also contacted and worked with the Massachusetts State Police with securing the package. The package in question was thoroughly examined and found to be empty. The United States Postal Inspection Office will be reviewing the case with the United States Attorney's Office, and the Georgetown Police Department will assist as necessary. This incident has been determined to be isolated to the Bailey Lane and Taylor Street area, and the public in the area or at large is not in any danger. Questions or concerns can be forwarded to Chief of Police Donald C. Cudmore at 978-352-5700. Thank you. All right. So, if I'm not mistaken, we have some appointments. So, Chief, why don't you come on up?
We do, sir.
If I understand correctly, you have a fine Irishman to introduce.
I do, sir.
Yeah. All right.
Good evening, everybody. I present to you tonight a candidate for appointment as a reserve officer, Pasquale Zollo. And he was an original candidate in our process back in April. And as I had told the board before, we've taken a number of candidates who have passed our psychological exam, our physical exam, and our background exam, so they don't have to continually do that as we find the need for reserves. So he's completed all of those requirements. Pasquale is a graduate of Masconomet Regional High School, and he currently resides in Nahant. He is a reserve officer with Nahant. However, their program is a little different than ours. The reserves are utilized in other services, not like Georgetown, where we're actually using our reserves for a standard patrol. So he hopes to continue his education beyond what he has in law enforcement. He's a graduate of the Topsfield Reserve Academy. Ironically, the director of the academy is here in the audience supporting him, so that's quite impressive to me. I've known Sergeant LaBelle for 30 years, I think, Sarge. Formerly a sergeant, retired from the Topsfield Police Department. He runs that academy. And quite frankly, all of our candidates these days have been coming from that Topsfield Academy because of its great reputation. So I thank the sergeant for coming tonight. Pasquale currently is a full-time employee with Honda North in Danvers, and with his experiences in Nahant, hopefully providing us some much-needed assistance on our patrol force, he will find a good future here in Georgetown. So I would respect the board, consider him as a reserve officer, and appoint him tonight as such.
Thank you, Chief.
You're welcome.
So we usually get started with any appointments. So is it Pascal or Pasquale?
Pasquale.
Pasquale. So welcome. So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, your history, and anything else that you might want to add.
So, originally from New York. Don't hold it against me.
I already did.
Happy about the Red Sox winning, as long as we're all on the same page here. Like Chief Cudmore said, I graduated through the Topsfield Reserve Academy there, and with Sergeant Bell. And there's a lot of education that goes on there, and I look to further my education in law enforcement field, take some college classes. I told Chief Cudmore I'll be giving as much time as I possibly can to the Georgetown community and the Georgetown Police Department to do what I can to make everything a better place. Not that it needs to, because I've heard nothing but great things about all of Georgetown, the community, and the police department.
Even after what I just read?
Even after we just
Really?
read.
Okay.
The chief, from everything I've heard about him, he's brought this community and the police department up a few notches. And I'm honored to be even brought in front of you guys tonight. So thank you for the opportunity.
Sure. Thank you. So at this point, I'd like to open up to the board for any questions.
Sure, why Georgetown? And not state, well, I assume you'll still be a reserve in Nahant?
Yes, I will still be a reserve in Nahant. Like Chief Cudmore originally stated that Nahant uses the reserve in a different sense. It's more of detail, extra help type things. Personally, I'd like to go further than that, and the Chief of Nahant signed off on the okay for me working in both Nahant and Georgetown. I would like to, get on the road more and get some experience under my belt and further that career. I'd like to one day move at some point into the Georgetown area. So I think it would be a perfect match for myself.
And so is your long-term goal to become a full-time law enforcement officer?
Yes, sir, it is.
Oh, okay, all right. Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
Anybody else?
I'll just say what I usually say.
Go ahead. Sure. Let it rip.
Many times I have lots of questions, but in this situation, we're happy and confident with the people that Chief brings before us. So that's why I don't have a lot of questions.
Thank you, Mr. Fowler.
Thank you.
Okay. Yes?
I'm good.
Okay. All right. If I can hear a motion, please.
Sure. I move that the Georgetown Board of Selectmen appoint to the Georgetown Police Department Reserve Officer Force Pasquale Zolo of Nahant for a term to expire June 30, 2019.
Like it.
So we have a motion and a second. Do we have any further conversation on the board? Okay. If not, all those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Looking payments, right?
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Welcome to our town.
Thank you very much.
Squeaky chair.
Thank you. Thank you. Congratulations. Thank you very much. Sure. Well, welcome aboard. Thank you. All right. We'll talk to you later.
Got the house. Good night.
Chief, thank you for those kind words.
Anytime, Sergeant.
Checks in the bill.
Boy, keep those cards and letters coming.
Just when I thought we were important, now the whole room is empty.
Yep. This is what we're used to, right?
All right, Chief, whatever.
Mr. Chairman, I have a reappointment. I did not bring the officer before us because you've already met Jacob Fitzgerald. He had started in Georgetown in 2016 as a reserve, became a full-time dispatcher for us and serves in that capacity today. During his time training to become a full-time dispatcher and getting that house in order, he stepped back from his reserve responsibilities. He has since gotten married, and he actually bought a house in Georgetown. So that's very exciting for him and his new wife. And now that he's back in it, he'd like to step up again as a reserve. So I respectfully request that we reappoint Jacob Fitzgerald for the same time period that we just did Pasquale Zola.
Anybody have any questions on that? Sure, Gary.
So he's gonna be reserved, but he's full-time employed as a
Yes, sir.
dispatcher with us? Okay.
He is. And so what we do in that case, Mr. Fowler, is we'll take his schedule, and on his, in our business, we call it his short week, so that he can work as a reserve officer and we don't encounter an overtime situation. Several of our dispatchers in the past, actually the last 2 full-time officers you've hired were full-time dispatchers, and then they went to the police side. Jacob started in Manchester by the Sea in 2013 as a reserve, so he's trained. He's done a great job for us. And he felt it was important to dedicate his time to get fully trained in the dispatch center. And so he stepped back from his reserve duties for a bit. And he's eager to get back to work. What's great is we still have his equipment and he's trained, and it's, you know, it's basically a 5-minute transfer to get him back out on the road. So these 2 positions are filling 2 vacancies on our reserve staff, which will bring the reserve force up to 15 again. We're running at 13 right now. We had a couple of transfers, as we had talked about, to full-time positions in other communities, and this will help us with that goal to keep it at 15. Seems to be the number that makes the police department function well.
Okay,
Thank you.
sure. Anybody else? Okay, if I can hear a motion.
I move that the Georgetown Board of Selectmen reappoint Reserve Officer Jacob Fitzgerald to Georgetown Police Department for a term to expire June 30, 2019.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Okay, if not, all those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, all set.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just have one more item for the board that was on my agenda. It's just a notification of a FEMA reimbursement potential for the storms. I know you've all received emails and notifications concerning the potential reimbursement from FEMA. As the Emergency Management Director, I manage that process. And I just wanted to bring to your attention, there were 3 specific storms that I filed IDAs for, an initial damage assessment for the community. There was one on the March 2nd and 3rd ice storm. The county did reach the threshold with regard to that storm for reimbursement. We, however, had really no expenses in that storm because it was a South Shore coastal storm. We basically may have had 1 or 2 people on duty. Additionally, that was it. Peter Durkee didn't report any damage. There was no brush or debris removal. It was a rain ice storm, and it just didn't impact and reach the threshold on the IDA. Although it did it for the county, it didn't do it for us. So that storm has been put aside. We had a second storm on March 8th. I had submitted an IDA for almost $70,000 in the storm. This one did impact us, quite frankly. However, this storm didn't reach the total threshold for the entire county, so there was no declaration for the storm. So that, unfortunately, I collected what I needed to collect to get to the $69,000, but it didn't pan out for us. The third storm, however, March 13th of 2018 was declared. I submitted a $72,000 IDA for this storm, and I'm currently looking for reimbursement for that. I'll need to meet with the FEMA representative. They come out and they'll review my IDA. I'll have to meet with all the department heads and kind of narrow down exactly what those losses were that they gave me. There's a new FEMA portal that I have to use. It's a bit cumbersome. I've been working with the treasurer's office. It's supposed to make it easier, and I think it will, but we have to get there. There's a lot of information that I need to put in the portal that the community has. As an example, I brought the last submission that we did for a storm where we received $102,000, and this is what it took to get that money. So it's quite a process. And they say this will go away. I'll believe it when I see it, but they say it's going to go away. So I'll be working with the department heads. What's that?
So it's about $1 a page.
Yeah, so I'm working on that. So I was, a bit disappointed I couldn't get to that 69,000 on the March 8th storm. We didn't reach it, but I'm going to push for the approximately $70,000 on the March 13th storm. I've started collecting that information, and once the treasurer clarifies and I can get certified what our expenses are and the employment, they're including fringe this time in the calculation for employees. So if an employee works overtime, that not only costs our community with regard to the labor hours, but there was a fringe cost to that. We're allowed to add that in there now, so I'm putting that in there. Just trying to calculate that fringe. We have many, many different levels and tiers of employees in all three departments, highway, fire, and police. So I have to have them extrapolate exactly what those fringe costs are. And then with the debris removal and the cost of our private contractors for snow, as well as the tree removal. Hopefully this works, and that's an additional chunk of money that we can get. So I just wanted to bring the board up to date on that.
Chief, just quickly, we have a newer member on the board, and Kip, for those also viewing at home, can you talk about those thresholds when you talk about, in the county and town, just as an education?
Well, what happens is in emergency management, a state of emergency or a declaration by the governor doesn't necessarily mean that there'll be reimbursement for any funds that we spend during a critical incident or a storm. What has to happen is the federal government through MEMA, so there's the Federal Emergency Management Administration, and then there's MEMA, the Massachusetts, working with the individual cities and town EMDs. We have to reach a threshold. It can be $9 million. It can be whatever the federal government sets for that particular storm or incident. And they then collect all of that data from the EMDs in the entire Commonwealth, and then it's done by county, and then some counties qualify for that particular threshold, or some do not. We've been somewhat fortunate in that, we are considered part of the coastal communities, but those other two storms were South Shore driven more than that other storm, which was kind of up here in the North Shore. So it's a complicated formula that they use, and what they do is they predetermine once that number is determined and arrived at, they send us out an IDA request, which is an initial damage assessment. Then we have to fill that out and send it back to them. Then we await a coordinator to be assigned to us so that we can justify what we've told them is our cost. And it takes a while. I mean, you probably, the funding, I have no idea when it arrives. I mean, that last one, Mike, it took, quite a while before we got that last check. I think it was like 18 months.
At least.
I've done the required webinars. I've traveled to both meetings. There was one in Lawrence and one in Beverly to ensure that we're on board with this. I filed with the portal, so we are signed up, ready, and willing. Whenever they want to be here, I told them, come on in, and I have the information, just awaiting our portal entry on the fringe, and we should be in pretty good shape.
Okay.
And they may deny some aspects of my IDA. It happens. I reach for everything that I plausibly would think is storm-related. We didn't have any structural damage like the coastal communities did. So, I mean, there were people, the culverts were washed out, bridges were damaged. We had nothing like that. The primary cost for us was snow removal for that particular storm. Police, fire coverage, and snow removal. That was our primary loss in that storm. There was no structural assets damaged in the community.
Okay. Any other questions for Chief?
Just one quick, so
Sure.
participation in the portal, is that supposed to expedite the process of?
I think it's supposed to simplify it.
Simplify, not expedite, okay, very well.
Maybe,
Understood.
maybe it'll be half that,
No, that's
Anybody
it.
else? All right, Chief, thank you very much.
All right,
Thanks,
thank you very
Chief.
much, Lieutenant.
Attorney Zessen, how are you?
All right, how's it going, everybody?
Thanks for representing with the attorney. I love him, but I don't want to be with him.
See you, Chief.
How are we doing tonight?
Good,
Thanks for
good.
attending.
Thanks
I
for having
appreciate
me.
it. So, Attorney Zessen is here tonight, in response to, some meetings that we had. And before I even go any further than that, what I'm gonna do is I'm really gonna let, Attorney Zestin take hold of this meeting at this
Okay.
point in time and tell us, what's going on.
Yeah, let me lay it
with
out
this
for you.
stuff. Yeah.
Thanks for having me again, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
We're here to discuss 3 separate open meeting law complaints, each of which were filed by Mr. Craig Lampert. One was filed October 9th, and the other 2 were filed October 17th. They all relate to two meetings that were held by the board in mid to late September. Let me just run through what each of those complaints alleges. So the first one, which is the most extensive complaint, alleges 9 separate counts of open meeting law violations. And I'll run through those one by one. What our obligation, and let me just give you some background here. What the board's obligation here is, it's required by law to review the complaint that was submitted, and then analyze it, decide if it's going to take any remedial action to respond to the complaint, and then if it desires to delegate authority to me, town council, to respond in writing to those requests. We've got 14 days to do that. I believe we're still within that 14-day period, so the goal here tonight is to hear what those complaints are, decide what, if anything, the board's going to do in response, and then authorize me to draft a response. So without further ado, the October 9th complaint, I'm going to try to go as quickly as I can without skipping anything. Mr. Lampert alleges the following: that the Board of Selectmen violated the open meeting law in the following ways. Number 1, the agenda failed to provide sufficient specificity to reasonably advise the public of the issues to be discussed at the meeting. And with respect to that, as you recall, the open session that he's referring to was dated September 17th, 2018. The agenda for that meeting listed 2 separate items, both of which were expected to be in executive session, with respect to a complaint filed by Mr. Lampert against a town employee and Mr. Robert Kelly, Red Kelly. In my opinion, the agenda items were listed properly. They listed executive session for the purposes of discussing a complaint. It does not require us to list the name of the individuals. In fact, it's not permitted. We're actually interested in protecting the privacy of the targets of the complaint so that their name isn't out in the public. So in my opinion, the town, or the Board of Selectmen acted properly there. His second allegation, number 2, the agenda does not include open session as a topic prior to the stated executive session. So the public would be aware it had the opportunity to attend and learn about the basis for the executive session. So based on my analysis, this is the only potential issue that I see with the agenda and the board's meeting on this date. By law, before you go into executive session, you're required to first have an open session, and then you would have a motion to convene an executive session. That happened on September 17th. The board met in open session first. The only issue that I see is the agenda didn't specifically list open session before the executive session. There's nothing you can do about it now other than to say that we'll correct it in the future. People were here because they expected the second item to be in open session, so it wasn't really a secret. Everybody, any member of the public, in my opinion, could have read the agenda and said, there's a possibility that it is going to be held in open session, so I'm going to either turn on my TV or show up here at Town Hall to see if it does go into open session. So, in my opinion, that can be corrected by a promise to make sure we include a specific item for open session on each agenda, even if you expect only to be an open session. Number 3, Mr. Lampert alleges the town violated the open meeting law because it reasonably anticipated and planned the indicated executive session would be a televised open session, as it was specifically discussed and stated in a previous open session meeting on September 10th. Now, what Mr. Lampert is referring to is a statement by the chairman on September 10th that the following week's meeting would likely be held in open session, as Mr. Kelly had expressed a desire to have it held in open session. That is all true. He said it was stated by Chairman Bonavita in open session that Mr. Kelly wanted it to be held in open. That said, Mr. Kelly retained the right to have it in executive session until we actually held the meeting on September 17th. So the day before, the hour before, the minute before, he could have changed his mind. So it wouldn't have been appropriate, in my opinion, to have that listed as an open session item.
Can I just say something?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was actually gonna say that. So if, for the board members, anybody who wants to ask a
Yeah.
question as we kind of go
I think
through
it makes
these, I
sense
think-
to interrupt me as I'm going
Yeah,
through.
because there's gonna be a lot of these and, so yes, Gary, please.
I just don't remember any specific names that night of 9/10/2018. I remember we had discussion, and I actually, said, I don't think we have to, just, I wasn't even aware of who was asking that it be televised. I thought it was the person with the complaint. I don't remember any mention of names that night. Now, maybe it was if you've reviewed it, but I can't.
agree, too.
I can't recall a mention of names. Not that, I mean, that may look better for us, I'm not sure. how
Yeah,
that plays.
I had no idea who it was, so I
Yeah.
mean, at that
Right,
point in
I
time,
th- and I
had no idea what was going on.
I think the statement that was made, and I reviewed the video, and I think the chairman stated that he believed that the executive session for the following week would actually be held in open, based on his conversation with Mr. Kelly, but he didn't state Mr. Kelly's name. So I don't know that it matters. The fact is, we couldn't have put a different item on the agenda because Mr. Kelly still retained the right to have it in open. And secondly, we didn't want to provide his name to the public without him coming before the board and stating that he wanted it held in public. So that's number
Thank you.
3. Yeah, no problem. Number 4, the first item on the agenda does not accurately reflect the correct location of the session, as the executive session was actually held on the second floor of town of town hall, that is, as opposed to the third floor as listed on the agenda. The agenda does state that the meeting is going to be held on the third floor. It was the first executive session was held on the second floor, based on the fact that several people had convened in the third floor in this meeting room because they expected Mr. Kelly to have his meeting in open session. I don't see it was a major issue. Anybody who was here would have known that we were going to move down to the second floor. It was an executive session anyways, so there's not much that really would have been affected by it. In the future, if you do expect a meeting to be convened in the second floor as opposed to here, you could make a notation on the agenda saying that the board may meet on the second floor if, due to space constraints or something like that. But again, in reality, people who are here know where you are. I think people who came here for Mr. Kelly's meeting were probably told that the board was on the second floor in executive session and it would be up here in a half hour or so. So again, that's a minor issue in my opinion. It can be corrected in the future. The goal of these open meeting notices is to provide people with information. I think that was done here. And to the extent that you have more information that you can provide, that probably should be done. But again, I see it as a relatively minor issue.
Any questions to that?
I was just gonna say, as far as I've been on the board, executive session has always been on the second floor, open meeting has always been on the third. I think the only time that we had it was the AC was broken. We went down in the basement because it was cooler, I think.
Yeah, and so, and that's good to know. I would, in the future, for your executive session notices, just put that on the agenda.
Sure, no, absolutely.
Number 5 on his complaint, with regard to the second item, the board failed to state the basis for convening an executive session and did not state whether it would return to executive session at the conclusion of the executive session. I reviewed the meeting. A motion was made pursuant to the correct provision of Chapter 30A. A roll call vote was taken as required by law. There was 4 yes votes. I believe Selectman Durney, you were not present at that meeting.
Correct.
So the vote was 4-0. As that vote was being taken, Mr. Kelly voiced his desire to have the meeting held in open session, so the board never actually convened in open session. And so I don't see any merit to this complaint. And secondly, with respect to the allegation that the board didn't state whether it was going to come back into executive session, you never were in executive session, so there was no need to state whether you were going to come back into executive session, if that makes sense. Again, there's a long list here, and I think, based on my review of the video, and also I was present, the only minor violation that I see has to do with stating the open session before executive session on the agenda.
So
Yes, absolutely.
if I may, it looks like it's mostly procedural. There was no intent of anybody, I don't think. I mean, I don't.
Right, yeah, and-
That's what I'm hearing from.
Right.
Like, it's mostly, we could have had a better procedure on how the whole thing went.
Yeah, that I think that's true. I think Mr. Lampert does allege that some of these things were done intentionally to avoid making them public, but I don't see any evidence that it was done intentionally.
Was it, okay, towards the end, but I don't know, are you getting towards the end?
I'm getting towards the end, yeah, I'll make my way.
I won't go there then.
All right, thank you, Mr. Fowler. Number 6, the board improperly discussed Mr. Lampert's character at the September 7th open session without providing you with notice. This one's alleging that Mr. Lampert, like the other 2 targets of the complaint, should have been given notice and an opportunity to be present at the meeting. In my opinion, that is not required here. Mr. Lampert was the one who made the complaint against the other 2 individuals. He has no statutory right to be present. The only time where somebody has the right to be present is when employment action can be taken against them, or they are the subject of the complaint. Here, Mr. Lampert's name was mentioned numerous times because he was the one who made the complaint, and discussion of him and his employment with the town was relevant to figuring out what his complaint was and why he found certain passwords that were issued offensive. So there's no way the board could have reasonably discussed the issue without mentioning him by name. And secondly, no action was taken against Mr. Lampert. He was simply the person who filed the complaint. So that's number 6. Number 7 is along the same lines. The board did not provide Mr. Lampert with any official notification from the town of the requirement to be present at the meeting as required by law. Again, it's my opinion that notice to Mr. Lampert was not required in this instance because he was not the subject of the complaint. 8 is the exact same thing. You were not given the opportunity to be present at the September 17th, 2018 session. This issue was let me back up a little bit. I had email conversations and telephone conversations with the union attorney regarding this issue before it came before the board. I advised their attorney that Mr. Kelly was likely to have the meeting held in open session, but there was no guarantee that that would happen. Given that it was an open session and that we knew that ahead of time, Mr. Lampert had the opportunity to be here. He chose not to be here. I actually spoke with Union Counsel before the meeting. Union Counsel was present at the meeting on behalf of Mr. Lampert, and did not request to speak during the meeting or provide any response to the concerns that were raised by the board. So the argument that he was not given an opportunity to be present, I don't think there's any merit to it. Number 9, the board improperly deliberated outside of a posted meeting. Mr. Lampert does not provide any support for this allegation other than the fact that the chairman knew about Mr. Kelly's desire to have it held in open the week before. I will openly admit that I had several conversations with the chairman and the town administrator regarding this complaint and the preparations for handling it at the executive session and or at the open meeting. But I have no indication, no evidence that a quorum of the board met outside of the open meeting to discuss this complaint whatsoever. Okay, and so my recommended response to Mr. Lampert for this complaint is that as a remedy, we propose to always list that we're going to meet in open session before going into executive session, and also as the best we can state whether and where we're going to meet in executive session. So if that's going to be on the second floor, state the likelihood that it's going to be held in that location. Any questions?
Any questions for the board?
Not at this point.
If I could.
Sure.
Make a motion for the board to allow town council to respond to this complaint.
All right, I have a motion, do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, motion and a second, any further discussion? Okay, if not, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay.
All right, thank you very much. The second complaint was submitted by Mr. Lampert on October 17th, 2018. In that complaint, Mr. Lampert alleges that the Board of Selectmen violated the open meeting law by failing to provide him with minutes of its open sessions held on September 10th and September 17th, 2018, and from an executive session that was convened on September 17th, 2018. These minutes, based on my conversations with the town administrator, were provided to Mr. Lampert on October 17th, the day that he filed the complaint, maybe a few hours after he submitted the complaint. Both of the open session minutes are posted online for public viewing. The executive session minutes that he's referring to are from the complaint that was made against a town employee that was held in executive session, and in my opinion, the board is not required to disclose those minutes as they're a personnel matter. So in my opinion, there's no merit to the complaint. I see no violation of the open meeting law.
Mr. Chairman, actually, the minutes were provided to Mr. Lampert before he filed this complaint.
No, thank you.
4, okay.
Thanks.
So if that's the case, what is this?
So
Why is he saying that they weren't given?
well, I can't get inside Mr. Lampert's head, but there is a requirement in the law that minutes from open sessions be provided within 10 days of the meeting itself. Here, the meeting was held September 10th, so ideally they would have been drafted by September 20th. Obviously, due to the difficulty in drafting minutes and the time that takes, it's not always done on time. I think what I would propose is that in our response we state that the board will continue to strive to have a draft of the minutes completed by the 10-day statutory deadline. But of course, that's in reality, it's difficult to
Did
meet.
Mike just say we did?
Yes, we responded to him via email that morning of the
17.
17th.
17.
And he came in the afternoon of the 17th. That's why I was really confused when he filed this complaint. We did send a certified copy of the letter to him as well.
So we were in.
But that would have gotten there, probably the next day. But I mean, he may just not have checked his email that morning. I rather doubt it, but
But you still have that in your email as far as the date that you
oh
said?
yeah.
I think, Mr. Chairman, the issue is the 10-day deadline that wasn't complied with. So the minutes, the meeting was held on September 10th. By regulation, those minutes are supposed to be finished by September 20th.
Yeah.
They weren't provided until a few weeks later by the town administrator. I think that's what Mr. Lampert is complaining
Do
about.
we have to approve those?
I thought we had 30 days to approve the minutes. Is that not true now?
So,
Isn't that the new-
so the law, and this is a confusing issue, but the law requires that a draft be available within 10 days, 10 calendar days. You're supposed to provide that draft copy with, a draft watermark on the paper within 10 days if upon request. The approval obviously takes longer because you're not meeting within that 10-day period. So the way it works is that Janet should draft the meeting minutes with a draft notation on them, and if requested, provide a draft stating that this is a draft only, the board has not approved. Upon review and approval, a final version will be provided to you.
Would not executive session minutes basically be just the votes in that? Or the minutes that went out, did they contain more?
The executive session minutes,
I wasn't here last week, but I saw where something about that they were sealed, so.
we'll get to that in a second. So the executive session minutes should still contain a summary of the discussion and the topics that were discussed, as well as any votes that were taken. But in this executive session, they related to personnel matters, so I would not disclose them anyways. That said, they should still contain a summary of the discussion. Does that make sense?
Yes,
Okay.
yeah, so it wouldn't contain everything we want, but it would just briefly describe what we talked about and how we voted, very
Right,
briefly.
yeah,
I would imagine you'd want to keep it as brief as you could to be within the law, but yet protect the people that you talked about.
well, right, the protection of the privacy of the individuals who are the subject of the executive session is done by not disclosing personnel matters. But that said, they still need to accurately describe what was discussed during the meeting. I don't recommend, not including details because you're afraid that it's going to be disclosed. We don't have to disclose certain minutes if they fall within one of the exemptions. But here, I would recommend that the meeting minutes from that meeting accurately describe what was said. It doesn't have to be a verbatim summary, a verbatim transcript, but a general listing of the topics that were discussed and then any decision that was made. All right, so if there's no further questions, a motion.
Make a motion that we advise town council to respond to this complaint.
Second.
Motion and second. Any further discussion on that? Yep.
Yeah, I think I briefly remember some of those minutes. And, I guess, is there anything in there that if we were gonna release them, we shouldn't?
He didn't release
I mean,
the
how
executive.
do we talk about that and what's proper without,
Yeah, are you
I
referring
mean,
to
it's almost
the,
like, do we have to go back into executive session to discuss what we can release and what we can't?
well, the executive session minutes are,
I have a person shaking his head over there.
right, so the executive session minutes are not being disclosed. We're withholding those based on one of the exemptions to the public records law. That executive session dealt with a personnel matter, and in my opinion, you never have to disclose that. So the minutes that were drafted are for internal purposes only. They never will become public record. The open session minutes, on the other hand, are broadcast through the television,
I'm
so
understanding it a little more now. Yeah.
obviously it's out there on video. You can go online and watch the meeting. So the minutes are going to reflect what was said during that meeting.
Thank you.
Okay, anything further? Okay, we have a motion and a second, so if not, all those in favor? Aye.
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 Opposed? Okay.
All right, final one, and I know this is not the most thrilling item. The final one was filed by Mr. Lampert on October 17th. In that complaint, he alleged that the Board of Selectmen violated the open meeting law by convening an executive session during a posted meeting held on October 15th to review and approve minutes from its September 17th, 2018 open session regarding Mr. Kelly. So, as you recall, on September 17th, the board met in open session to discuss the complaint against Mr. Kelly and the passwords that he issued to two members of the fire department. Mr. Kelly elected to have it in open session. When the board met to review those minutes on October 15th, a motion was made to convene an executive session based on the confidential or the perceived personal nature of those minutes, and the fact that it was initially listed as an executive session. And my understanding, based on a review of the video and the minutes, is that the Board of Selectmen had a good faith belief that it was permissible and lawful to convene an executive session to review those minutes because of the nature of the discussion in that meeting. The fact of the matter is that the meeting itself was held in open session. It's by law a public record. It's up on the internet right now. You can go watch it. Whether it was about a certain individual or a complaint against an employee, once it's held in open session, it's a public record. So I think it appears to be a good faith misunderstanding of when the board can go into executive session to review minutes. I don't think there was any intent to violate the law. But, it is worth pointing out that these minutes are now on the website. They've been made public. The only issue is how they were reviewed and approved. So, again, the fact that it was held in open, the meeting minutes are now on the website, is a pretty good indication that there was no intent to deceive or to hide information from the public. I think, based on my understanding of the situation, the board was probably concerned about Mr. Kelly's privacy interest, and that's partly why it voted to go into executive session. My recommendation for this particular complaint is to state that the board will review the proper bases for going into executive session and when it can go into executive session to review meeting minutes. And the basic rule is, if the executive session, if the meeting was held in executive session, then you can go into executive session to review the minutes. If it was held in open, you review the meeting minutes in open session.
Tim, this is what happened, wait, this happened on the night that Red was here, right?
Correct. So
that's.
Minutes of that.
the minutes from that,
It happened at
From that
October
meeting.
15th.
We approved them.
I thought the confusion was on the actual, the minutes themselves, where I think it's stated that it was executive. And we
Yeah.
thought it was open. I
Go ahead,
just
go ahead,
think there
Mike.
was, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, having not been at the original meeting, and I knew we were going to approve the second half of the meeting that was in executive session, I counseled the board to make both of them executive session minutes, and they should be approved in executive session. Tim and I talked probably the next morning, and he said, no, it wasn't always intended, it wasn't an open meeting, they should have been approved in open. And frankly, we sent the minutes, despite the fact that you sealed them, we sent them anyway to so he got his minutes, but he complained that you erroneously approved them in executive session.
So I would
Into that?
call that a procedural error. There wasn't.
Yeah,
any
that's
intent
why,
on our end
that's
to do
why
anything.
we sent,
Yeah.
even though, instead of waiting for tonight for you to reapprove them in public session,
That was gonna be my question.
it sent them anyway, so we weren't in violation of sending them to not within 10 days.
Would there be any merit in reapproving them tonight? Or,
You mean
I would-
unsealing them?
yeah, so what I would recommend, not doing it tonight, but putting it on the agenda for your next meeting,
okay.
because it's not
It's
on the
on the
agenda, it's
agenda.
not on the agenda for tonight. And I think what I would recommend doing is that in my response, stating that the board intends to put this on the agenda for next week or 2 weeks from now, to review and approve it in open session. That said, they are already on the website. So, thinking this through, I'm not sure if that is really necessary. I think the fact of the matter is they are on the website. They've been reviewed and approved by the board. There is a video of the entire meeting online, which is much more comprehensive than the minutes, which are just a summary. So I don't know what value. I think it's a good suggestion, Mr. Fowler, but I'm not seeing any real value. And if Mr. Lampert proceeds with this open meeting law complaint process, I think the record is pretty clear what happened. Everything is online. It's transparent. There's really nothing more the board can do other than promise to review the procedures and not commit a violation in the future.
Yeah, go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, I mean, I think what in regard to intent, I think it would be good to let the AAG's office know that prior to that, I think when we had discussion about whether something should be an open meeting or not, and whether it should be televised, the board agreed that any open meeting, regardless of what it's about, should be televised, and we haven't strayed from that, at least since I've been here. So I would hope that we want to make a point that we weren't trying to hide anything. We were trying to be as transparent as possible. So that's all.
Anybody else want to add anything? with
Just
the
a
third one?
clarification, you noted that we had 14 days to respond to the complaint. What is 14 days from which date?
From the date that Mr. Lampert filed the
Filed.
complaint, so October 17th, which
Okay.
14 days from then is
First.
31st.
Okay.
I believe it's business days, so we still have some time on that one.
Okay. Thank you.
Anybody else?
I make a motion that we have town council respond to this complaint.
Second. Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion on that? Okay, if not, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I'm gonna abstain as I was absent that night. But I think you're making it.
So I want to know two things. So I find it surprising that Mr. Lampert would go through the effort of filing all of this stuff, okay, and requiring us to now go through every single complaint. And it meant so much to him that, he didn't even, attend tonight, to even prove any point. So I find that, to be, surprising that, he wasn't here to even, discuss this, whatsoever. In addition, I find it also surprising that, he has, enough time to, question all of this because, it does have everything to do with his job. For someone who works so little in this town, I find it pretty incredible, that he's nitpicking and all this stuff. So I have a real problem with this. And I also have a real problem with the fact that, as I stated in the last meeting, that all of this stuff is to me, I'm not gonna say relevant, it's small, right? And yeah, it's procedural stuff. We have no intent of breaking, to tell you the truth, this board, when it comes to executive session, general session, open session, we follow the advice of town council, and generally Mike, on how these procedures happen. And if, at times, if it's not done correctly, it's not our intent, okay? We'll fix anything that has to be fixed. We're always trying to follow, the rule of the law. So, with that being said, as I said the last time in another meeting, here we are, and as I have told Tim, we love seeing Tim and everything else, but this town is spending a lot of money on council for these little things to me, where we could be putting these resources to better use elsewhere. Mike, do you have those numbers by any chance? As far as where we're at,
For the first quarter of the year, we've spent,
just on this issue, right?
specifically, which issue are you referring to?
With this, from the last meeting where we needed Tim here, where you had to attend, what was it, October or whatever, or September something, now we have him here. What are we spending just on this, issue alone with?
Well, I just got September's bill
Yeah,
last Thursday.
Okay.
They billed behind, but we've spent a little over $3,500 on legal fees related to the fire department in the first quarter of this year.
okay, so just for the public in general, that's what your tax money is going to, is this nonsense with passwords and everything else. So, thank you, Mike, appreciate it. Anybody else have any,
Yeah, I
statements?
just
Go ahead.
have a comment. I take all these you know, complaints, and everybody has a right to file a complaint.
Absolutely.
And I take them extremely seriously. I think it's evident through all the meetings that we've had since I've been on the board. We're always asking, are we doing this correctly, you know, in terms of procedure? So it's in the back of our mind, I think all members of the board, and there isn't any intent, at least on my part, I can only speak for myself, to evade any open meeting laws.
Yeah,
So
all right, Andy.
Yep.
Anybody else?
that's all I got.
Yeah, I'd like to say
ahead.
something and probably question towards procedure. I'm somewhat familiar with complaints to the state. I put one in before, I believe. But, and perhaps it's different being a sitting member of the board than the public. I mean, I tried to come to resolution and did seek some. Is there anything, any requirements for the public to try to do that? To try to come to resolution before they send a complaint to the state? 'Cause
Well, that's a good question. So the way the procedure works in the statute is that he first files a complaint and it goes to the board that
okay.
the violation is alleged against. The board then meets to discuss it, decides if the proper procedure was followed, and if not, they can propose a remedy, which is what we've done in a
That's kinda
couple.
what we've
That's what
done
we're doing now. We're gonna file a response saying, "Dear Mr. Lampert, we think that we comply with the law in most respects, but we're gonna continue to strive to comply, and in the future we will do X, Y, and Z." Mr. Lampert can say in response, "Great," or he can go ahead and file it with the AG, the office there.
So as it stands now, this really isn't it's on the forms, but it's not really a state complaint. It may have been sent in, but the proper procedure.
Yeah, the AG's office does not have possession of it right now. It hasn't been filed there.
Okay.
If we respond and Mr. Lampert is not satisfied with our response, then he has, I believe, 30 days to
Okay, so
file
that's the
an
procedure.
appeal to the state.
Okay.
At that point, the state would review the complaint, how we responded to it, and the underlying allegation, and decide if any further remedial action can be taken.
If I could make one other comment, and
Sure.
that is that, to stay within these laws, we have a well-knowledge town administrator who I believe at the last meeting thought he was doing the correct thing. It wasn't. We had the meeting back in September with the attorneys present, and we still may have done some things. So obviously, it's hard to always stay within this law.
No, yeah, we're always trying to do the right things.
There was, I may react what, I think it was Steve and maybe Charles also, that, there was certainly, I don't think, no intent that I'm aware of to keep anybody out of anything. If we've done it the wrong way, it was probably because we're being overly cautious, which is, I think, maybe some of what happened last week. So it's not easy, but I think we're doing our best, gentlemen.
I agree. And procedurally, if we have nothing to gain, I don't see that we have anything to gain as a board if procedurally we haven't done
Best isn't
the
always,
right thing. I mean,
best isn't always good enough. If we've made some mistakes, we will try to correct them.
there you go. And that's what it is. I mean, again, this was unnecessary. Anybody else? No?
I don't have anything else to say
No,
about this.
other than, we live in an era when somebody's angry at you, then,
Well, and that's
they'll make all kinds of complaints.
Yep. Okay. Thank you. I appreciate it. Actually, Tim, now that I have you here, I was just actually looking at, if you could be here just for a couple more minutes.
Sure.
So, one of the other things on the agenda, gentlemen, is the Park and Recreation discussion on the director. We brought this issue up at another meeting, and there was some discussion and questions around potentially looking at a director, for Parks and Rec. And I've had a couple of discussions with town council, including the last one was with Attorney Zessin. So maybe, Tim, instead of me getting into it and maybe, fumbling that, if you could, maybe bring us up to speed on our conversation about that, about how we might be able to do this procedurally, how it can happen.
Yeah, sure. So the chairman and I had a discussion about this. The question that has been raised is whether the Board of Selectmen and/or the Parks and Rec Commission can hire a director or some other employee in a capacity similar to a director. I don't know exactly what you would call it, but the idea would be to hire somebody to assist and spearhead some initiatives within that department. And my initial opinion was that the Board of Selectmen, by statute, is the appointing authority for that position. I know that's an issue in this town in particular, where you have numerous appointing authorities. But my opinion is that if the Board of Selectmen wants to appoint somebody for that position to do that job, it would have the authority. Now, obviously, you need funding for the position. The compensation schedule doesn't have a classification for that particular position, so the wage schedule would need to be amended to reflect the new position. In terms of job responsibilities, salary, that's all something that can be discussed by the selectmen, and it's pretty open-ended. It really depends on what you want that individual to be responsible for. There's no other employees within that department, so it would be him or her, working with the commissioners on various projects. But there's not a whole lot of supervisory authority. And there's also an issue of whether it be a year-round position or seasonal, for lack of a better term. And from what the chairman stated on our phone call, it's perceived that this would be not a year-round position, given the weather and the financial constraints and the needs of the town. This would be something that would be spring to fall or summer.
And there's nothing in town meeting, that we have to get approved or anything
Well,
else.
town meeting is obviously, it needs to fund.
No. I mean, as far as us appointing someone, to that, we don't need anybody giving us, the ability. We can just do it, as a Board of Selectmen as we sit right now.
Yeah, but with the caveat that the funding would need to be, okay.
Yeah, that has to be done, I know that.
But, the Board of Selectmen is the appointing authority,
Okay.
as long as there's funding for it.
Okay. All right, does anybody have any questions, because again, I know there was some questions, the last time. Any other questions about how we kind of play a role here in terms of trying to get that done?
So just to clarify, does the funding have to be in place first before we could appoint somebody? Or even the role? Or
You gotta pay them.
right, so it has to go in that order, though.
Look, there needs to be a funding source, and right now there isn't one.
Right.
So if you were to hire somebody to show up tomorrow, you're obligated to pay them, and the check has to be drawn from an account. So I would recommend that the funding be in place before the hiring be done. That unless the hiring is for a date in the future. If you say, we are going to hire you effective May 1st, 2019, subject to us obtaining funding from town meeting, I think that's something you could do, and there's a chance that the funding wouldn't be approved. But that's a way to do it and start the job search now, with the understanding that town meeting is going to meet in the spring, and in all likelihood approve the appropriation.
Gotcha, okay.
Anybody else?
I think we need to be cautious here, Mr. Chair, because as a board, we've not discussed this or made any decisions. And I've heard from you that you've got somebody in mind, and so we need.
I have
to
3
be-
people in mind.
But we need to be cautious on how we proceed, because it doesn't look to be, you talk about having a complaint about deliberation that wasn't there. You can't create a job. I'm saying use caution, because in a way, it sounds like this board could be creating a job for someone that you know or have in mind. And I think we need to be cautious going forward. And also, that when you discuss this, it's in our policy that we should have everybody that's involved here. And when I saw this on here this morning, I asked Janet to contact at least the chair of the Park and Rec. And I don't know that they were informed of us discussing this, you know, in the proper timely manner.
We've discussed it in prior meetings.
It's on here, and as discussion on tonight's agenda. And like I say, it's only a policy, but we should be doing our best to follow our policy. And our policy is that we should be inviting people that are involved in these things to the meetings when you're gonna have discussions. So that's why I'm just saying, proceed with caution, please.
I mean, listen, if you have feedback in terms of how we have discussions, then,
I mean,
then let her
you
rip.
have made
I mean,
you have made me a member of the Park and Recreation, and, you know, we weren't aware that this was gonna be discussed tonight.
Again, it has been discussed in prior meetings, you know, that it was gonna be brought up, and I had Mr. Demento right in front of me, you know, and he actually literally said, yeah, I think it should happen. And again, while we're having our discussions, not so much for Park and Rec, but for the feasibility of a director. We're not, it's simply a discussion. I don't think Park and Rec has to be here for that. So, Tim, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Tim. Have a good one.
So along those same lines, with that, we do have, you know, the authority. So at this point in time, I want to discuss the potential of doing that in possibly a funding source. You know, for that, you know, maybe there's some extra money, somewhere. Or, you know, what does the board feel would be the appropriate avenue to take to start, you know, thinking about this and really putting something together, you know, job description, you know, figuring out what kind of money we have, you know, things like that. Go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, I would recommend that we ask Park and Rec to put together, you know, when do they need this person? What's the timeline? What do they see? Their job descriptions, I really don't know. And what they think the appropriate pay is. I think that's probably a good start. And then present it back to the board, and then we can, you know, we can start to talk about that. But that's just my opinion on how to get things started, only because I don't know anything about how we would go about this, the pay scale, what the duties are. That's just my view.
Yep, Kip, did you have a,
No, I would agree with both of you. I think it does need to be documented. When we had that conversation with Jim before, you know, we talked about that and how he was going to try to come up with a list of the projects and things that, you know, the work that needs to be done that he could use some help with. I do think that, you know, obviously the funding source is obviously paramount. We need the job description. We need a punch list of things that need to happen, like roles and responsibilities. What are the requirements for this role? You know, how do we measure success of this role? You know, what projects are they going to be responsible for? Which are Jim going to be responsible for? How are we going to work that out? What would the hours be? How many hours a week? Things like that. I think it all needs to be documented and packaged together so we can make a collective, knowledgeable decision on what we want to do.
I think, if I could, Mr. Chair, I think that also has to be presented at town meeting when we're asking for the appropriation, because, you know, obviously there's going to be a whole lot of questions, right? Why do we need this? So it would be great to have all that information, maybe have the chair of Park and Rec or someone on our board present it to the town before they vote to appropriate it, and just outline like Kip said, everything that, you know, how is it going to be measured and what benefits of the town it's gonna, you know, it's gonna bring. I think that's an important piece that we need to put together.
Yep. So the question is, how do we do that, right? How do we want to?
Probably
Kind of. I mean, do we want to just do it? Huh?
with Park and Rec, do we want to?
Well, first of all, I mean, if you go back to your packets, Parks and Rec has supplied us with their budget. They did supply us with what they do, okay, what their functions are. You know, Jim had a separate sheet, so I don't know if you guys keep those. But if you go back, those were supplied already, you know, and he specifically talked about it. A lot has to do with American Legion, you know, during the springtime in terms of putting the docks out and, you know, what fields they're responsible for and everything else. If we need to come back and regurgitate those, then so be it. I don't care. I have the stuff at home, but I don't mind if they come back and again they're gonna have to talk about it again. But if you do have it in your and you keep your packets, it was in there.
Is the position though, it isn't a person that will actually perform the duties that he was telling us that his team does. I thought the position was more like director level to, you know, to get all the programs in place, to understand whether, you know, we have the liability for East Street, what's the scheduling gonna be like for ALP, what's the parking, what types of thing we can do. I didn't think that it was gonna be like actually go out there and mow.
Yeah, well, the
or
great
clean
part
house,
about
yeah.
this, gentlemen, is that it can be anything we want it to be. It hasn't been formed yet, right? So we can say, yeah, the director, we want to do all this stuff, but yeah, he might have to get it, or I should say him or her should have to get their hands dirty as well. I mean, that's the thing. We are in a position to kind of dictate what this, you know, will or will not be. Go again.
I would suggest, I've heard great suggestions, I thank you for them, but we also need to work with Mike and Finance to know budgetary-wise
Sure.
next year what we have, because that, what you have, I mean, you can have dreams and you can have reality. And so, or you can do your best to strive somewhere in between.
Okay.
And maybe that's what we're striving for. And it's just, as Steve said, I don't know if it's so much at town meeting as it's gonna be at the budgetary time of year, when you've gotta say to finance also, this is what we see, these are the needs that we've got. So like I say, you need to know financial-wise what you feel this is gonna cost, and again, what it's gonna take. I mean, it is one thing, some of the things I know that, they perform themselves. So now if you're turning this over and you're gonna have outside contractors and perhaps a person that's overseeing them, or, as it's been said, are we looking to hire somebody that's gonna actually go out and perform what they can perform? So, there's work that needs to be done, and I would say hopefully we can come up with it and get it done for the next budget season.
Yeah, I mean, and I mean, I guess we're not quite there yet in terms of putting anything together, but it's a good time to do it, right ahead of.
I agree
ahead
with
of
you
time.
there.
So, I mean, it's, I think we're in a good spot, you know, where, again, we can dictate what we kind of want out of the position, you know, and as far as money, yeah, we're at the beginning stages of the budget, right? So, go ahead, Steve.
Can I make a suggestion, if we ask Mike to speak to Jim and just have him, just whatever we collectively decide tonight, have him put together what he, you know, he thinks the responsibilities should be. Is it hands-on, is it high-level procedures? What's the, you know, the dates that he needs them, what he thinks the appropriate pay is, and then have them come back and we can continue the discussion. If that's the pleasure of the board, I don't.
Well, it's something I think we're all in agreement that we really need to look at as the scope of this.
Right.
And we get more fields, and we have a subcommittee looking at fields. It's something that's larger than the current Park and Rec Committee can, you know, just goes over what they should be reasonably expected from them. We do need to, like, I agree wholeheartedly with Kip, that we do need to have a very detailed description of what we expect, We need to involve Park and Rec in that intimately, you know, unless they say we're not. But they should be involved intimately. We got to make sure that we post the position properly so that the entire world knows, you know, that it's out there. And so, but as Gary said, we need to proceed cautiously.
Yeah.
And I think you need a short-range and a long-range plan that we've talked about. I mean, I could see, you've got someone else that was meeting tonight, I think they're more on sports, on that field study. But, you know, we've got open space, and I know that they are actively working, that, you know, they've come before CPC and got funding to start trying to figure out how to pull all our trails together. I mean, because you're talking seasonal, and I'll tell you, I personally would want in the future that it be year-round. I mean, maybe the person wouldn't need to be on year-round, but you might figure out year-round activities. I mean, you know, there was someone on the Park and Rec at one time that tried to have winter skating in a certain area, you know, and it went over very well, except with the neighbors. And so it was kind of discontinued. But I mean, you know, there's also winter activities that could take place. Everything doesn't need to be in the summer. So, you know, what's your long-range plan also?
Yeah, sure. That makes complete sense.
Yeah. The other thing I'll just add is that, you know, there's the financial piece, obviously, but I think it's really important for us to delineate between what Parks and Rec is going to do and what this director would do. Because you don't want to end up in a situation where they're going head to head. Who's responsible for what? That's mine. No, that's mine. You know, we need to have them work together versus against each other. So I think if we just can delineate exactly who's going to do what and how they can work together, we'll be better off in the long run for sure.
I mean, the whole point to this position, and I do just want to make sure I remind everybody, was, you know, on 2 different occasions in 2 years in a row, right? You had the chairman saying this has become bigger than him.
I agree, yeah.
Right.
Oh,
Right. It is, and if it's bigger than him, it's going to be bigger than anybody who's in a voluntary role, okay, in, you know, in a Parks and Rec capacity. So, based on the chair of that group's feedback, okay, I do want to remind everyone that is really the purpose of us even being here, right? Is to address, because we do have some things that have definitely fallen by the wayside, right? They're coming along a lot more slowly, you know, than we would have expected. And, you know, again, and we thank everybody, you know, who's in a volunteer situation, but again, I think it's just gotten bigger than a lot of them can kind of take on at this point. So this director is someone who, you know, can maybe take, you know, the bull by the horns and kind of, you know, go with it and put a lot more time into it. We pay for that time, but if things get done, you know, I think it would be well worth the investment that the town makes. So go ahead, Gary.
If I can speak to that, my memory of that also may be more that what's going on at East Main Street, that the size of the project and the difficulties in it. It may be more the East Main Street, what you're mentioning. And on that, I also was sort of asked, because Mike may have more information than I've got on it, but I was just briefly asked if someone could pass on to this board. At the last I knew, all the bids for East Main Street came in over budget.
That's correct.
So we need to take that in. So that's been another hurdle to get by now. How do you stop and redirect when, you know, you've got a budget and your bids all came in over it? So there's been another curve thrown, and we as a board, on Park and Rec board member, probably will be discussion at our next meeting. But
Okay.
so,
I don't know if you-
but they did pass on at the last meeting. We were made aware that the bids came in over budget, and asked if perhaps I'd pass that on here. So
Don't respond if we can't really talk about it. But was it way over budget or?
Way over.
Okay.
The problem, in my estimation, and this has happened in the past, the consulting engineering firm that's giving them the estimate is underestimating the projects. Grossly underestimating the projects. I spoke to a vendor who he called to ask who the bidders were and what the bids. And he told me, he said, I looked at those specifications and I said, no way can I do that for what and he knew what the budget was because he
Yeah.
pays attention.
They know the budget.
But, and still they, we had at least three, maybe four bidders. But one of them was $100,000 over, the budget. And
Why do
that's
we
what
still have
happened,
the firm?
that's what happened with the.
Why do we still have the engineering
phase-
firm or the surveyor firm? if
Well,
they're
I
not-
think
if
they're the
not
ones
doing
that have
their
been
job?
recommended, and they've done several projects for the
Sorry to
town in the
interrupt you,
past, I
Mike.
believe, correct?
They have, but
Yeah.
the same problem. The first phase of East Main Street, same thing happened. Grossly over,
Well, when it first started, I don't believe they were the ones. They had another engineer I can remember. Because that's when I sort of got interested in CPC and was attending some of the meetings. I wasn't a member at the time. But yeah, hadn't the engineer done other work in town? Matter of fact, they're the ones that I thought, is the name correct, on when we had the study done on what to do up at the high school? Is this-
Yep.
Yeah. same
Yes, it
one.
was.
Yeah.
And they're all no bid contracts.
So do we?
Just picking them
And now, let me ask there, because we have actually signed up, we've actually signed something with them when we put it out to bid, right?
to manage.
So if it doesn't get approved, are they still getting paid, is my question?
No.
Okay, that's good to hear.
Well, they're getting paid for
What they've done up to now.
doing the bid process.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But should they get paid if they haven't done it properly? Or were they
That's a-
perhaps,
That's a legal
were they perhaps trying to,
question that I can't answer.
yeah. Well, that's some of the hurdles, gentlemen.
Yep.
It's-
So,
it-
thank you for the update on that, Gary. But going back to this, so what do you gentlemen feel in terms of really getting down to the nitty gritty on this? Do you think should this be a 5-person discussion, or do we want like a subcommittee that can kind of maybe put some of these things that we're talking about together? I'm just throwing it out there. What do we think?
I think maybe we come back as a board
Yep.
as to what we're all looking for going forward. I mean, I think
Good suggestion.
you've got a lot of ideas.
Mhm.
I would say that would be our next, if we could come back with what we're looking for,
Yep.
and that could perhaps get passed on to Mike for budgetary,
Yep.
and get passed on the park and rec. I mean,
All right, I like it. So for the next board meeting, can everyone come, equipped with some ideas, okay? So that we can, have a conversation. Janet, if you could put that on our next agenda, for our next meeting, we can have an open discussion about that. The role, goals, both, as Gary said, both short and long term. How we see, the person in this, role, what their, what their real objective is and kind of how they will oversee everybody. I think, that'll be important. So everything that you would want to see, from the position, if you could be equipped with, and, we'll all, get some ideas and hopefully we can put them together. In the meantime, Mike, if you could have that, discussion with Jim, I think, that'll be important. We can kind of lump that in with our discussion from what Steve said, in terms of, roles, responsibilities that they see. Both now and maybe for this person, I think that, will also be some, relevant information for that next discussion.
Yeah, I will.
Okay?
could we
And-
look for some models? Mike
Yeah,
sometimes
we
is
have
good at
towns,
that.
Right?
Yeah, you could just.
You go to any town website, you can find out what. people
Models, I
do.
said, could we look for some model, how have other towns done this and been successful, which is what Kip said, we don't wanna start and be. get
Well,
great
a model
intentions.
as a paid position or, a volunteer? 'Cause
How
I-
have other towns perhaps put this all together and been successful at it? I mean, on the large picture, I mean, this could be a person that has to work with the schools, even with Council on Aging. I mean, you know, it's park and recreation, but it's park and recreation for everybody. So, you know, how far do you go? That's, you know, or are we just basically looking for someone right now to handle what we've got?
Yeah.
But to me, it sounds like we're looking for further. That's what I'm seeing here. I mean, we know we've got some problems with usage, but I think we're going much further than that.
No, I think according to Park and Rec, to your point, they specified at an open meeting that it was starting to get, all the fields, all the projects, everything happening. It's getting kind of out of control for a volunteer to handle. You know, it's like, it's taking a whole lot of time.
Well, if I remember Jim
yeah.
correctly, what he
Shouldn't say out of
had said
control,
was
but-
probably when East Main Street comes online, that might be when they need something.
Yeah.
And, you know, so I think we're on the right track.
Yeah.
I just hope that we can, you know, keep informed with them and move this forward.
Okay. All right.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, sir.
as far as a model, what I'm hearing is we need a park and recreation department where the Conservation Commission is the commissioners are the policy board, and you have a department head with staff to make everything work.
I kind of asked that at the last meeting. I said, if that's what you're looking for, put it out there. We need to be open on this. I would, however, and nothing against, how do I say this properly without hurting feelings? I don't know that the Conservation Commission is the one to do it, because they don't want you out there in the woods at all, is the feeling that I get. I might be totally wrong, but I mean, that's the feeling that a lot of people have. Well, if they hear it and I'm wrong, I apologize to anybody. I know we all are volunteers and strive to do our best, but
Well, a director would have to,
it might be better off under this board. That's what I'm saying. I hear what you're saying, but I'm questioning, should it be conservation? And I know they are, I know Camp Dennison that we've talked about does fall under them, and that works well, but, and much of the trails and everything falls under them, so perhaps it is the proper way to go, but.
No, well, I said conservation, I misspoke. I meant Parks and Rec Commission.
Oh, okay,
Yeah,
okay.
they're both commissions, but I meant the park
Well, you may have just got me in a
commissioners.
lot of trouble with that, but
Oh. No.
but I'm used to it.
The Park and Rec Commissioners act
Okay.
as the policy board, and they have
Yes.
a department head that's working for them, under them. And he hires the staff and
Yeah.
gets things done.
Right.
But see, the problem with that model though, Mike, is that, when you say
Costs a lot of
hires,
money.
yeah, I don't want, I'm looking, so as it sits right now, right, Jim is your chair, and then he has people that are volunteers, under him. And I think there's one or two people that, make some money, but, I'm just looking at a model to replace Jim as the chair with a director, and Jim could certainly stay on in some capacity, but that director replaces Jim as someone who has more time, okay, to put towards the things that Jim does not have the time for, right? And Jim could stay on, and then all those people can stay on. Well, no, we're going to replace anybody. All those folks can stay on, right? Because I'm looking at top of the house to really have a person navigate, okay, this is what we have to do, all right? And I know this is what we have to do, all right? It's it's their job to get that done, okay? And they're also saying, okay, we also have West Street that we have to mow and that. So he's delegating, or they are delegating, the folks on that board to do all that other stuff. And again, can also go out and do that stuff as well. But we need someone top of the house to both delegate but also do the kinds of things that Jim, right now, in the way it's set up, does not have time for. All right, that's kind of how I say. I want to keep it as simple as possible.
You'd have a Park
so-
and Rec Commission that would be structured like other boards and commissions that we have, where you have an employee that would be like the director.
You have a conservation commission that we appoint that has a commissioner that
Right.
works for them.
Right. You know?
Is that for the proper term?
You know, instead of having an entirely separate department. So you need a director there to do the lion's share of the administrative work. And then that frees up the commissioners.
Some of it may also be, we've had this conversation once before. Mike and I and Janet may have been the only ones here that remember that. And it was as to who has directorship over the certain parcels in town. Remember that? And as a board, we did put that out there because it came forward. There was a problem once down at Harry Murch as to, it's a park, who has direct over that park. Some of it, so there's those things also that we need to remember. Who actually have we given the okay as a board that is the director over those parcels? I guess some of it is conservation, some of it is park and rec. Some of it is maintained by the highway department. Some of it's maintained by the park and recreation department. So we maybe putting in the budget for something in one area, you could possibly be saving in another. So there's those. So it's there's a lot out there. There's a lot to do.
Okay, so let's move on. Again, why don't we, just all come ready to, talk about your ideas, at the next meeting. Mike, like I said, we'll contact Jim, get some feedback from him. I'll end with this. We don't, because I want to respect what you said, right, as far as, inviting people here if they want to be here. But again, I don't, is that something we want to do? Do we want to invite Parks and Rec to that meeting for that discussion?
It's sort of our policy that we should be doing that.
Okay, so Janet, if you could do that, again, I have no problem inviting anybody and everybody. So, again, we're not trying to do this ourselves, but if that's what the pleasure of the board is, I have no problem with that.
I did let Jim know
So-
about tonight.
Oh, you did already? Okay.
Respond, he did know, but he didn't know.
All right, well, if you could invite him again to the next meeting and tell him we will be discussing this, and, any feedback that he would have will be certainly welcomed, okay?
Just one thing, just to keep in mind, the next meeting's in a week, right? Is that enough time for you to get in touch with Jim and get what you need?
A week? Oh, yeah.
Yeah, November
Only
4th.
one
Yep.
week, so just keep that in mind.
It'll be tight, because Jim doesn't communicate very readily.
It's busy. That's the whole point here.
We may
Yeah.
need to move it to the second meeting.
Yeah, and it's like they don't
3
have,
weeks
I
out.
know, there's no meeting of Park and Rec scheduled for this week, so.
Yeah. Well, again, we'll invite them, right? I mean, if they do want to attend, great. Okay, if not, they don't,
But
and then we'll invite them again, at the.
But at least the
next
protocol was followed
Yeah.
and they were invited.
Yep, and that's fine with me. Okay, so moving forward, Mike, why don't we get to the town administrator's report with the financial policy discussion?
Yeah, I've borrowed these financial policies from the town of Topsfield. They participated in the Community Compact program as we did. They got a grant as we did. We used our grant for long-range planning. They used their grant to develop these financial, comprehensive financial policies. And they put them to good use because at their most recent bond rating, they got their bond rating improved. And the bond rating company cited the comprehensive financial policies as one of the major reasons for that happening. So I'm not saying if we adopt these policies as is, we're gonna get a better rating.
Right.
We have to adopt policies, because Moody's did ask for whatever policies we had. And we have a policy book in the selectman's office downstairs with 13 policies in them. And they range from what to do on snow days to how to distribute free cash. We actually have one of those. We don't follow it, but we have a policy.
We discuss it though usually, Mike.
Yeah, we do.
How old are those policies?
They're all within the last 9 years.
I think Mike has pushed forward a lot of them.
I've been, trying to, so this is a comprehensive look at our financial policies. I reviewed them. Topsfield is a very similar town to us in size and operation. So I think these are, I'm not saying we have to delete the town of Topsfield and just submit,
Yeah.
the town of Georgetown in them. We need to take a look at each one of them
Yeah.
to see that it actually applies to us. But in my review of them, most of them do. Now, frankly, their financial position is a lot better off than ours. For instance, they always have excess levy. They have very high levels of reserves, double ours. In most cases, their minimum free cash, they never spend below. They always have at least 600,000 in free cash in the bank.
So can I ask, are most of these numbers in here you haven't changed?
That's correct. But for instance,
I noticed stabilization, they had 3%. I thought we strive for 5 or something.
well, the question is 3% of what?
Yeah, okay.
So,
Yeah, there's 3% of prior year's tax
There's
levy.
their prior year's tax levy.
right. Well, yeah, like they're, okay, 3 to 5% for their free cash of its annual budget,
Now, what page was that?
What page is free cash?
7.
Okay, thank you.
In our case, 3% of our annual budget, which is 30 million, would be 900,000. And up to 5%, which is 1.5 million. And that's just free cash. We were looking at numbers like that just for our reserve fund. And in their case, well, on page 8, they talk about, and these are recommendations based by DOR and the GFOA, the Government Finance Officers Association.
So like on page 9, when I mentioned the 3%, that's on page 9 to 3%, but that's the prior year's tax levy.
Yeah,
We
and-
may be there actually, because I think when we look at it as a part of the overall budget.
no, well, no, on page 9, they're talking about the capital stabilization fund.
Okay, yeah, yeah.
And so 3% of prior year's tax levy which was, the tax levy was 20 million, 20.3 million, so 3% of that is a little over $600,000. That's just in their capital fund.
Do they have CPC over in Topsail? Or not?
I'm not sure.
Yeah.
It's, I'd have to look into that. My guess is, yeah.
'Cause that's 3%, right? I don't
If
know.
they're doing it right, they're getting matching funds somewhere.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But their general stabilization fund is not less than 7% of the prior year's tax levy. So 20.3 million would be ours, times 7% is 1.42 million, which is what, we were talking about.
Right, on top of 3% and 3 to 5% for the other funds.
Yeah,
Right.
So we're, it's gonna take, if we adopted these numbers as goals, then, we're not gonna get there right away, but like they have, until this target has been reached, a minimum of $25,000 will be appropriated each year to this fund. That's very modest. We're talking about 100,000 right now at the, at this board, and even at the FinCom was talking 100,000 for stabilization, 50,000 for OPEB. And that's what the rating agencies want to see, though. They want to see dollar figures. They even mentioned that during our call. Because right now, we say up to 25% of the free cash goes to stabilization. Well, number one, the stabilization's got to be higher to the free cash has got to be higher.
They've got a method to try to have free cash. They've got
Yes.
that policy. So in a way, I could see funding it that way. We, on the other hand, are fortunate to end up with it, but many times that funding ends up going towards plowing roads and other things. We have put money in there.
Yeah, half of
So
it.
if we had a policy that said we're gonna try to maintain this, and at least now you've got a funding mechanism. So I could see, because, when we've talked about this at finance, I've thought that that's backwards to be funding these things with free cash at the end of the year, because you may not have free cash. And if you remember at one of the finance committee meetings, they kind of came up with pay yourself first. And I kind of thought of that, well, that's not paying yourself first if you're funding yourself with free cash, that you're not sure if you're gonna have one way or the other.
That's right.
But if they've got a policy, there's a policy to strive for free cash and to keep that, so I guess you can, because doesn't leftover free cash, though, have to go into the general fund?
No,
Okay.
it stays in free cash.
So that free cash can roll over?
Yes. Unfortunately, the last several years, we've spent it down to like
Yeah.
$8,000.
Yeah, well, if we had a stable amount, and we could still appropriate some of that to go to a stab fund or a cap fund or OPEB,
Yeah, you got to build everything up.
Right. But it can come out of the free cash.
Yes, they're really the only sources. Free cash is the only source that really build up the stabilization funds.
We typically use that for reserve, too.
Reserve, but
Well, we always try to put some in reserve, and does sometimes some of that get funded with free cash from the prior year? That's what I'm saying. When we figure out.
are you
where-
calling the stabilization fund the reserve fund?
No, we typically have a reserve that you come in here, and you ask to take money out of the reserve.
Oh,
account
yeah.
to Pay things.
That's a a budget line item.
Yeah.
It's the Finance Committee Reserve Fund.
But is that line item budgeted, or do sometimes we move free cash into that, is my
No,
question?
that is budgeted. It's typically, we usually, we've used it as it's around 95,000. That's where we start, and if we.
We've used it sometimes for police, I think.
Oh, yeah, we use it for all
Yeah.
different
Right.
departments. Unexpected expenses, because we can spend it out of that with the finance committee transfer. Unlike free cash, that takes a town meeting vote. So
Yes,
it's a mini,
yeah,
it's a mini free cash pool.
yeah.
Yeah, but it's how we have used it in the past.
Have we asked for input from the finance,
Yes,
Advisory committee, yeah.
at our last meeting, I didn't actually introduce the policies, but I introduced the concept of the policies.
Gotcha.
And this is gonna be on the FinCom's agenda for their November meeting.
okay, great.
Mike, along the same lines, this board has actually asked, to communicate a little bit more with FinCom, for this year. And we've been told that it's a little premature, the end of the summer. But here we are, end of October. At what point in time is it going to be feasible where, it's probably a good idea to get together with them? To start talking about these types of things.
Well, once they get this, and they'll get it prior to, we'll have a full-blown discussion at our November, I think it's, let me look. I think it's November 15th, 14th meeting. I mean, I'll talk to Ed, see if he wants to have the board come in then, or save it for the December meeting, because they don't get the budget until the end of January. January 31st is usually when, the last week of January is when the budget gets presented to the Finance Committee.
What does the board think? Should we meet before then, or should we wait till the budget's presented?
I can,
Oh, you want to meet before the budget is presented?
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
I didn't know if we wanted to be specific when the budget was presented, or talk conceptually beforehand, so.
No, because this is a higher level, this is a 30,000-foot level policy
Yeah.
decision. You end up getting in the weeds with the budget.
Go again.
question as to this, is there any of this that requires town meeting approval in that, or is it's mostly a procedure and policies that would be set
Just,
here, but in conjunction with FinCom?
right, I think you want buy-in from FinCom and the Board of Selectmen, but they can be adopted just by the Board of Selectmen.
And I remember at the last meeting, the chair was clear, because I introduced a model or something, and he said, well, if you're talking policy and procedure, that's on you guys.
Yeah,
So
but they definitely want to have input on financial policies.
I don't know that I've attended all their meetings this summer, but I've attended several of them. I know Selectman Dawes has too. And I will say that when the Moody's thing came out, they're taking it just as seriously
Oh, no doubt.
as we are. I mean, but if you remember, they were having trouble with a quorum, and until that absent member got straightened out.
Yeah, we had, the absent member is was at the meeting this month. Two of our members were out of town, but we had,
You mean a new member or
the new member has been very active.
Yes.
And our older member that has been a no-show has returned.
Oh, I must have missed that meeting.
It was just 2 weeks ago.
Oh,
Can we not mention names here? Because I don't know who we're talking, I know who the new member is. Who are we talking about, the old member who's returned?
Matt Newhall.
Oh, Matt, okay. All right, I just wasn't sure who we were talking about. Okay,
He was MIA for a while,
okay.
but he's committed to participating this year.
So they have a full board now?
Yes, they do.
All right.
I was only referring to the one that got replaced.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's the one I was referring to, Lou.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Mike, this is something that you've looked at, you know, that really is implemented in Topsfield, yes?
Yes.
Okay. So the question I have is, can you really implement a policy, you know, based on another town, if we really don't know how that town, say, compares to us in terms of projects, you know, that we're doing compared to maybe projects they've already done, right? So they're not reinvesting a lot of their money into things because they're already done, where we have a whole laundry list of stuff that, from a long-term standpoint, we're trying to accomplish. I mean, we just had an economic development meeting that, you know, we're talking about, you know, running lines and, you know, it's costing millions and millions of dollars, you know, which we can get funded another way, but, you know what I'm saying, that, you know, they could just be a much more well-established town, you know, with those kind of projects, but, you know, here we are, you know, we might not be as far down the line as they are.
Well, this isn't project-oriented. This is just following best practices or requirements for, I mean, if you notice on almost all of these, there's references
Gas, speed.
to, you know, Mass General Law 4431, achieving structural balance budget, the Government Finance Officers Association. These are policies everybody should be
But
following.
what I'm saying is that they're able to do that, but as you said, we're down to $8,000 this year because there were certain things that just had to get funded. I don't think we allot money to a lot of things unless they have to be funded. So I just don't know if, you know, we're in the same position as Topsfield, where they can do that. They can leave 600,000 as a policy, you know, in their free cash, where I don't know if we're exactly there, because year over year, since I've been involved with the town, I don't think we've come close, you know, to being
But
able.
we have to strive to get there somehow. And that's why you have, if you don't have a policy to get there, you're never gonna get there.
Well, that somehow is that policy, or is it more just, all right, we just need to generate more revenue that we've talked about a million times? If we generate that revenue first, all right, now we have something we could talk about with policy, but if we don't have the money, we don't have the money. So I don't know if, all I'm saying is this the time to do this? Or is it the time to do it when we actually identify bigger revenue sources where the town's taking in more money? And now we're seeing that, hey, yeah, we do have more money that we don't have to spend. So why don't we implement this kind of policy so that, you know, we follow a certain, you know, guideline? I mean, are we at a point that we can adopt this? Because to me, I don't see how we do.
I think we're at a point, if we don't adopt it, we're gonna be,
Yes.
Right.
I think it's like, if I
Screwed.
could, Mr. Chair, it's like a
pardon
capital.
me.
Hold
improvement
on. So, for this, all right, yeah, I guess I'll save, you know, the next statement, but I know Doug had a question first, so if I could let Doug go.
On quick perusal of this, I've looked it over. I did some underlining, especially under the different funds. The other thing that seems to me, that it seems to be a very good financial policy. What we would need to do, in conjunction with finance and the finance director, you, is determine the percentages that they're using. Look, they're using 7% for one fund, 3 to 5% for another, of gross, previous year's tax levy. So we need to determine what numbers work for this town. As far as policies, policy is policy. And they look to be pretty decent policy, whether, it be Topsfield or Georgetown. But we just need to determine the numbers that would fit within our structure that could use these guidelines to try to attain.
I think that's well said. I guess that's what I'm getting at, is I don't think we're.
No, we have to make it
Yeah, no.
fit
Right.
us, but these are the best practices that well-financed communities, not just Topsfield. I mean, these were developed for Topsfield by the Collins Center at UMass. Their financial people did this for them as part of, as I stated earlier, as part of that community compact grant. They paid, substantially more than we did for, they got a bigger grant than we did.
Yeah.
And this has been, well, this is FY19, this has been in the works since FY16 for them. They're just now adopting them.
All right, Steve, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna make a comment that, I look at this like a capital improvement plan, right? Even though you don't have the money, you still should have a plan on what you wanna do. I think what we could do here is if certain sections wouldn't apply, or we don't have a certain percentage that we can allocate, I would say that this is more of a living document where, you can start out that says the town should strive to do this percentage, and then each year you review it and you see if you're hitting the goals or not, and if not, you readjust. But yeah, I think, and especially from the standpoint of the bond ratings, if this is, if you can present a package like this that's gonna help improve ratings, that's,
Well,
yeah.
I think Moody's told us that they want something like this, right?
Yes.
is that what they said? Yeah, then, there you go, yeah. But yeah, I agree in terms of the percentages, right? That's something that we're gonna
Yeah,
need
you just have to
talk to
adjust it for the
FinCom,
town.
yeah, and figure out, but if there are things in here that don't apply, but we would like to strive for them, we can make note of it, it doesn't have to be a stringent policy or a, it could be more that we wanna get to that point at a certain time, so.
Yeah, like they do a comprehensive financial report, or a CAFR. That's above and beyond what's required by a general audit. But it's more comprehensive than an audit, it's more transparent than an audit, and, it's something that, and, where I'm a part-time finance director and I go, that's probably not gonna happen unless we had, a full-blown finance department with clerks and everybody else to be able to pull all that kind of stuff together. But, so that's one area that I'd say is out of our reach, and it's a nice to have, but it's not very doable at this point in time.
Roger.
I'm gonna use this opportunity. I have a handout on this subject. I presented similar figures. I think there's enough to go around to get put into the record. I presented similar figures at a finance committee meeting. Because they had asked at one of their meetings for people to go out and try to come up with ways of funding things. And so I took it that I could come back and do that also. But their answer, they looked at it, and said, it's certainly an idea, and they will look at it. But what they did tell me there was something I mentioned earlier, and that was that, because I was mentioning that we could make it a policy. I talked with Mike about this, it's not something that we can direct fund, but it would have to be more of a policy or a procedure or best practices. And so, I mean, I just want you to, I've mentioned this several times, not all of you may have been here, about using new growth, and I've always said 50% of it. I've gone down, hoping people might buy into this, using 25% of it. If you wanna know how, I mean, the figures are here, I can also hand out this. This is just last year's. There's a lot of scribbling on there, really all you need to look at, but it would just be proving, you know, I mean, I'm taking the budget thing that comes out, what the last, what the new growth has been since 2016, and I took 25% of it. Now, what I'm suggesting we also do, because it's new growth, so if you put that, the first year that, if we started this, you put that money in, which would have, I'm going backwards only because those are the figures we had. If you'd have put that money in, now the following year, you used that money for something. You put it in your savings account, but you didn't budget anything with it, other than your savings account. So what I'm proposing is, you could now budget a line item that you could start growing. And that 25%, last year, that would have been, I went over the figures with Mike, that would have been, I think it was 1.3% of the overall budget. So it's a very minute part of it. It's just an idea. I mean, if anyone else has come up with ideas, but I think that we've got to start looking at things like this. Because I personally see, if in 4 years, you could have grown your savings to over $500,000 and a line item to $250,000, think of what's out there for the future. I mean, you talked, Joe, about where do you find the funds? Well, the funds may be in your budget. It's just how do you allocate them? And you've got to start at some point. I mean, at some point, if you followed this procedure, you could be bonding projects with funds from this, you know? So, just something to look over and try to digest. But, you know, we've talked about these things, but at some point, we've got to bite the bullet and say, how are we gonna fund it? And I personally, yeah, I think if you've got something like this that says you strive to have free cash, but we don't always have free cash. Where these figures are on the budget, new growth is typically right at the top of your budget.
Yeah.
And what made me, you know, and I felt like finance was saying that, pay yourself first. So you take it right out of the top of it before it goes anywhere else.
So Gary, so.
Did you have enough
what
to
do
go
we do?
around to put in the
Yeah.
record? Thank you.
I mean, I like the idea, but have we looked into what the expenses are related to new growths, or just operational wise? What, you know, what are the services that we need to provide?
Well, why
to
I
support
take new growth
the
is because
yeah.
new growth isn't in last year's budget. Now, we had in the Abrams report that we spent the money for, that we got the grant for, and we had the 10-year projection. The Abrams report stated that our free cash going forward is gonna be nil, and so far that has been proved wrong. Okay? So, I'm taking this because, as you say, what's it gonna, it's not in last year's budget.
Gotcha, right.
So you're taking a new part of your budget, that's, you know, that's
right.
like the bonus. We're allowed to go up to 2.5% of our levy. But the new growth is like the bonus part, you know?
Right.
If somebody puts in a addition, it's not just new homes and new street developments. Someone puts a built-in swimming pool in, that's new growth. You go in and you tax them more. You put in an addition, that's new growth. So the new growth is gonna be there. So I'm just, I mean, I've been asking for a long time. I mean, I've been,
Maybe to
this
start-
is my 10th
yeah.
year, and I've been pushing to fund it somehow.
I
And
do
it
like
always
the,
ends up on, but I mean, I've never really presented it like this. So
I like the idea, but I mean, I wonder if we can go even deeper and say,
Great,
you
great.
know-
I said 50%
no,
at
no,
first.
no, I
That could've
don't
been
mean,
done.
I don't mean percentage-wise.
I went down because no one's been buying me at, no one's been buying at 50%. I said, maybe if I show 25%.
No,
I mean, it's at 20, I mean, that's a small part of your budget.
Yeah.
It's not in last year's budget, so you're not really hurting anybody.
I should s-
Look at how it
Yeah.
substantially grows.
I think what I meant was get more granular into the types of new growth. I think that would probably be a great start, that,
Well, if you guys on economic development
figure-
do a great job, I mean, that
If we-
25% will be even more,
yeah,
right?
if we figure out, here are the types of things that it really won't impact the current operating budget for the next year, let's put 100% of that away, you know?
Well, that is the question.
Like you
That's working
said,
with Mike,
pools
and I went over this with
and all
Mike
that,
first to
right?
make
So
sure that it
pools
was,
Right, I mean, it's.
Heads, all that kind of stuff, you know, just
I mean, I
anything that we
understand.
don't
Because
have
if you
to.
put the money here, then you have to
support.
sacrifice something.
Yeah,
Right? You
yeah.
have to say, all right, this is money is going here, and it's not gonna be, put towards a service or whatever, it doesn't matter. Pick anything.
Yeah.
Listen, like you just said, I'll put 100% too.
And you-
But what services get sacrificed?
You could, once your stabilization funds I see this right now as get your stabilization fund. And once that's at what it's at, now where do you start putting it, You don't have to put it, and like I say, if you grow that line item budget, we could have a plan for the future to finance things without finding new revenue, without having to ask the town for an override. And I mean, we've been, forgive me the words, but, because I haven't been in favor of them, but we've been fortunate in the things that we've asked the town to fund in the time that I've been on this board. I think they've all passed except one that was very confusing in how it was presented. And there was two questions on there. One got funded, one didn't, and I think that's the way everybody wanted it to go. But there are other towns that are struggling to get that, and I mean, they have to go back and back. I mean, we've been fortunate, but in the future, we may not be so fortunate. So I'm saying, come up with a plan to perhaps have some wisdom for the future. That's how I see this.
I think it's a wise idea I know that Pam and I, in just our own household budget, try to maintain a 6-month fund to cover expenses if something should happen where income was lost. And I don't see anything wrong with a town doing the same thing.
Why don't
If
we
you do it
look-
through you can set up a different fund to move that into, so that it's relatively untouchable.
Thank you,
Why don't
Mr.
we
Chair, for the time.
look and see what of those, the new growths that don't have that substantial of an impact to services in towns? That would be kind of your starting
Yeah.
point,
Well,
I
that's a
mean,
good-
obviously, you build a new home, right? Well, that's gonna hit everything, right? It's gonna be
Agreed.
schools, it's gonna be police, fire, the whole 9 yards. But if we can identify, even if it's smaller
But a lot of
amounts,
those.
but at least it's a starting
A
point.
lot of those services are already there, and that's what, over the years, they increase. I mean,
Yeah.
it's just like schools increase, police department increase, at some point, do you need more fire engines? Agreed, but those are the things that this would be funding.
Yeah.
All of this isn't really taking money away from the taxpayers, this is just finding a funding mechanism for the future.
So Mike, where do we go with this? You know, was this really for conversation for right now?
Just to get started.
Okay.
I think we need to, sooner or later, get on the same page with the finance committee.
Yep.
Hear their recommendations and then adopt it.
So why don't we figure this, for right now, is that, let's all get, really familiar with this, and as I said, why don't we schedule something with, the finance committee, I mean, for me, as soon as possible, I guess, and we can have that conversation. Okay?
Mike, you said finance already has a copy of it?
No,
Okay.
they're going to be discussing it at their meeting
Okay.
on the
Yeah.
14th.
So last question from Steve.
Yeah, I haven't had a chance to go through all of it, but is there a section in there, to Gary's point here, about what they do with new growth?
No.
Or no? No, there isn't, okay. That might be something that, no,
I didn't
you
read
didn't
that.
say it,
Yeah,
no, okay. That might be something we wanna consider.
All right, gentlemen, moving forward, Mike, thank you for, doing that. Actually, anything else? Mike?
Agreed, thank you,
Yeah,
Mike.
you're welcome. Yeah, I just wanted to inform the board that the Board of Health had a special meeting this morning, and they had a single topic. It was the Theo's Restaurant, and they have determined, after numerous health code violations, to
Bond it.
revoke
That was closed.
their food service permit.
Okay.
So the ownership has a right to appeal. They may or may not go through an appeal process, but Theo's is closed.
Okay. Thank you.
And come to find out, as a note, was that he never renewed his common victualer's license for this. So he was running without a common victualer's. It's too bad. Places could be a gold mine for the right person.
Okay. Anything else, Mike?
No, that's good.
Mike, by the way, thank you for all your work you put into tearing down the house. Everyone's really excited about the fact that it's gone. Really opens up the area. It looks really, really nice. And looking forward to further conversations down the road about kind of what we do with it.
Actually, to comment on that, the demo costs about just a little over $14,000. And while this, Peter suggested to me, and I agreed with him, while the machinery was there, what they're doing now for the next 3 days, today and 2 days after, they're removing all the topsoil.
Okay.
Because otherwise, it would just be a big mud pit. They're removing the topsoil. Peter has fill, mostly tailings from scraping the roads, and they're going to put in the gravel and the fill and pack it down so we'll actually be able to use it for parking.
Oh,
It
great.
won't be paved parking, but
Yep.
it'll be able to be used.
It gives a substantial base, that stuff.
Yeah, and it was at a substantially good price, $4,800 for 3 days of work, and Peter supplying the fill. So
Okay. That works. I can get on board with that. Okay.
that's all I have.
And by the way, as I thank Mike, thanks to Peter and all his crew as well. I know they put a lot of time and effort into that. So thanks to the Highway Department for that. So, all right, why don't we get on to general session minutes to approve for October 15th? Anybody have any comments, issues with those minutes?
Just to clarify part of it, I wasn't here, but Page 3. Chief Cudmore was talking about the traffic study committee, which I'm a member of. And they didn't recommend to the town this policy, but in fact, we did. We voted at a December 12th meeting, 2-1 to recommend to the Board of Selectmen. Now the acts that we accepted were a little different than this. But we did move that here to this board, and this board discussed it at our January 8th meeting. So, but I think this board took no action. So I just wanted to clarify that a little bit. But it was brought before previously to the Traffic Study Committee. It was acted on and sent to this board.
You're talking.
I don't think we need, I mean, it wouldn't be correcting the comment, because it's just stating that, you know, just to let the board know that it has been here and that the Traffic Study Committee did take diligence in when it came before us.
So you're talking about Bailey, Taylor, and Lakeshore?
No, Chief Cudmore put it before us for West Street.
Oh, West.
He wanted something done on West Street, and that was what we discussed here. And I think because we wanted to discuss it further, we didn't take action on it at that January 8th meeting. But,
Is that January of this year, Gary?
yeah, 2018, yeah. Yeah.
I thought we had, I thought there was some doubt as to why, or we didn't have all the information why the
Agreed, I think we
recommendation
wanted to look into it
was gonna
further,
be
but
made,
it
yeah.
never, like some things do, it never came back up under old business here, I think.
Okay, any other further comments?
One quick thing on page 4, someone actually reached out to me about this. Just to clarify that that Bailey Lane there's no upper and lower Bailey really. It's just Bailey Lane.
Right.
So they're saying if we were ever talking about putting signs up or whatever,
Yeah.
it's one road. So we have to just keep that in mind.
Years ago, you could drive through there.
Right.
but you
Yeah, it's
can't anymore.
It's just not a continuous. road.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we just do that,
Yeah.
lower and upper, so we
Everyone
know
knows what
what
you're
we're
talking about. Exactly.
That was happening in my last meeting, too.
Maybe something needs to be done on the town map.
Anybody else on the minutes? Okay, so can I have a motion to, anybody wanna make a motion?
I move that we approve the minutes as presented from the Board of Selectmen meeting on October 15th, 2018.
Second.
Okay, motion is second, any further discussion? If not, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I'll abstain, I was absent.
Okay, we have an Area 4, announcement. Let me open that up. So for those viewing, there's the Area 4 breakfast. That will be Saturday, November 10th, 2018. Doors open at 7 a.m. That goes until 11 a.m. And is located at the Pembroke School. It's all you can eat. And for the kids, it'll be fire prevention information and items for the kids. Tickets are $8 for the adults, $5 for the kids, 12 and under. Okay. Let's see, down on the list. And then lastly, on the agenda, we have the Kiwanis swap, which I think already happened.
Yeah, I thought they were out in the square Sunday.
Yeah. So do we have to even do anything
It
with this?
Scheduled for Saturday.
it was supposed to be,
Well, Saturday, rained.
yeah, and it was supposed to be the KSC this weekend. But Kiwanis didn't get their application, didn't come in time to get on our last agenda to be approved. So they were gonna do it this weekend on the 3rd. But they wanted to do theirs in conjunction with Halloween. So they asked the KFC if they would switch and let the Kiwanis do it this past weekend.
Oh, so it
And
was
then-
Kiwanis in the square.
It was Kiwanis in
I
the
was
square.
wondering why I
and
didn't
now-
get peanuts.
No, it was No, that was Kiwanis is peanuts, and KSC is the Tootsie Rolls. So the KSC, so Kiwanis asked if we
Yeah,
could
that's
just
fine.
vote to switch it.
But I mean, they've
It's
already
just-
done it on the 27th, so it's happened already, so we don't have to vote anything.
Well, but now we need to approve for the Knights
One
to
that
do
already
something
happened.
on the 3rd. Well, no, it didn't happen yet.
Oh,
It
okay.
was- Yeah,
So
Well, then
they're
would-
following procedure.
So we have the,
yeah,
that's a Columbus Tootsie Roll Drive.
Would-
That
would-
will
would-
happen.
would-
which we already did approve, but we
Or for
approved it
the
for last
Saturday.
weekend.
Yeah.
And they were kind enough, because the Kiwanis had costumes, they wanted to
So
dress
you
up
just
in for
want us to switch the
Halloween.
date, what's the
So,
date of KFC? Is that on here?
November 3rd,
November 3rd, okay.
yes.
So basically, we just need the motion to,
Well, so let's
That way
make a
swap the
motion that the
dates.
Board of Selectmen accept the change of the swap dates between Knights of Columbus and the Kiwanis
Yes.
from October 27th to November 3rd.
Yes.
Second.
okay, motion is second, any further discussion? If not, all those in favor?
Aye.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, if you might have one thing.
Yeah, I was gonna open it up to, anyway.
Oh, okay, sure. Oh, just because I just realized this, today that Thursday is November 1st. So on November 11th is Veterans Day, and there will be a Veterans Day ceremony at Harry Murch Park, 11 o'clock on Sunday, the November 11th. And the public is invited to attend. It is a Sunday, and it will be during church services for a number of churches. But we do encourage you to come out.
Okay, anybody else have any, go ahead, Steve.
Just a quick update from Economic Development. So we had the consultant that we hired through a grant to review the downtown storage and what options we have. So he presented to the committee. He won't have the final estimates of what these options would cost until we meet again, which I think is in November. So he's expected to come back and present to us what he recommends that we do and what the cost associated is on that option. But I think we're making some headway, and I think we'll know once and for all what the town wants to do. Either we go forward with it or not. So it'll all be down on paper, and I think it'll be a good a good decision, I think, for the town to come to terms with, okay, here's what we have as an issue with downtown, here's what the solution is, and whether we want to proceed or not. So, that's all I have.
That's it. All right, actually, along those same lines, Mike, do you have any further updates with National Ave? I know we had subdivided the parcels. No, it went before planning. I had talked to John. Things were fine. There were a couple of tweaks I think they had to make, but other than that, I mean, how quick can we get this out? To start a bidding
Well,
process.
the way it was explained to me, it wasn't subdivided, but it was an ANR was
Yeah.
approved, but that's not a subdivision. I'm still confused on it.
Okay, so we won't.
You don't wanna
So
ask
let's
me
not,
anything.
all right, so we won't go into it. Our town planner, John Cashel, is doing a good job, with following up on it. He knows that's an important initiative. We're making some progress. I know the surveyor, did everything that we had asked him to do, got us that back. So I know that's in the works as well, so,
Some things are approval not required, is that what you were saying?
Right.
Yes.
okay. All right, so other than that, our next meeting is Monday, November 5th, which is next week, at 7 PM here on the third floor
I got just a quick update, Mr.
Sure.
Chair. Just to let you know, CPC has started meeting for this year. We've opened the application process. At our last meeting, I don't believe we'd had any, but that's open till, I don't remember, I don't want to quote the exact date, but it's somewhere close to the end of November is when we will close that application process. And also just October 19th, I did along with Selectman Dawes also was there, attended the Mass Municipal Breakfast representing Georgetown over in Newburyport. So, nothing really I brought back out of there. I put in a good word for our school system there, just to let you know, so.
Thank you.
And for the
Thank
school
you for
department
attending.
also.
If I may, Mr.
Sure.
Chairman, Gary, regarding the CPC, we talked about it at the FinCom meeting because Ed's a member. The CPC schedule needs to be accelerated. They can't wait till April to have public hearings and things like that. They gotta be done by March.
Well, we usually follow the procedure. I know we've gotten things back to the selectmen, but I guess you'll just have to get that to us and we'll discuss it at the meeting.
It's.
I mean, you'll have to
it's-
give us the reasons why. I mean, is
Well,
it?
because it's too late. We don't have time to review anything. And it just needs to be done a lot
We'll
faster.
do our best.
Just like the school committee, they were on their own schedule. And they've been notified by FinCom that they need to accelerate their process.
Yeah.
April is too late.
Well, I know, I think one of the things that comes along with that is getting things perhaps is like with the attorney, I mean, just so that I can pass on what now what we typically do, I think we usually before the warrant closes, I think we try to get all the, I can't remember exactly how we do it, I think we perhaps try to move forward all of what's proposed, and then they sort of fall off as they get approved. But we do try to follow the timelines that this board has, so perhaps if you could just write it down and pass it on to the chair that this needs to be done by March sometime, and the reason is so that things can be approved by the attorney, that can be turned over, and then it sounds like finance needs time to go over them, and we need more time to go over them. And we will do I think our due diligence to meet those requirements. If in the future, I doubt that we'll close that date earlier, but in the future, maybe we need to start earlier and close the date a little earlier, but we also don't know till a certain amount of time what we have to work with, so. I don't even know if at the last meeting, I don't think we knew our funding yet. I think that was still trying to be figured out.
Okay. All right, do we have a motion? To adjourn.
So moved.
Second, motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
For all of our trick-or-treaters out there, have fun, but be safe. We wish you a good night.
Thanks.